This is Pantdora, my 1,000-gallon cloud rainforest vivarium, which contains a biodiverse tropical ecosystem of creatures, plants, and fungi, all intertwined in a great food web within glass. But they have no idea their great big world was about to get a whole lot greater and bigger. This is Orchadia, my brand new canopy vivarium on the upper floor, designed to mimic life up high in the rainforest trees. And it too actually already has some creatures living inside. But it was now time for the great connection. Behold, the glass bridge that joins these two gorgeous worlds. I proceeded to remove the sponge barricade. Residents of Pantdora, it's time to enjoy your new world of trees. But little did I know, a host of creatures would be coming out to play at this great connection event of two awesome biological worlds. Creatures I'd never imagined I'd ever see in this new 2-story vivarium. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 14 of my Ecosystem Vivarium Series, where I officially joined two of my giant rainforest vivariums together, only to discover that Mother Nature had a few surprises in store for me. Here on the AntsCanada Ant Channel. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC fam. Enjoy. Creatures immediately began making their ascent into the new world of trees above. At first it was mostly crickets, a trail of invasive ghost ants, and soon the roaches. I was surprised to see that roaches, which are usually only active at night, were making their emigration up to the canopy in broad daylight. Comes to show you how eager the insects were to explore the world above and or get out of Pantdora, where they knew predation was an ongoing danger for them. Even the vines of Pantdora were already making their way towards the glass bridge in hopes to ascend into the new trees. But there were a few creatures that would be making a surprise appearance in both Pantdora and Orchadia at this great connection event. Some totally not on my biological bingo card. I would soon be surprised to discover the host of new animals that were lurking in our double vivarial world. So, Smog, what do you reckon is up there? Inquired Drake, as he gazed up into the void of vines, disappearing into the glass bridge above. Not sure, but not interested, Smog dismissed, as she basked on the tree stump. All right, Drake moved in and tried to get sweet with Smog, as he bobbed his head to try to woo her, but she stood her ground to shoo him away from her prime basking spot. I'm pretty sure these two have been breeding, but have long passed their honeymoon stage. The sunskinks, though partially arboreal, in my opinion would not be able to climb the glass bridge. The vines were much too thin and too vertical of a climb. They were solely bound to Pantdora, sleeping below ground within the mosses, like Daenerys was doing here, and not suited for true life in the trees. Drake soon moved on to the great tree trunk to find another spot to bask, as our fattened Smog sat there contently, soaking in the rays. But one creature I was extremely excited to see hanging out during the day, for the first time ever, was this. Godzilla, our baby caiman, floated there in Aqua Noctis, the Blackwater pond, with his watchful eyes above water. I gasped at what he looked like below the surface. Just look at that belly. It's so full. He's perfected hunting at night for roaches and crickets. And needless to say, this is one happy and fattened crocodilian. But the reason I was excited was because he'd officially reached the stage in life where he was emerging in broad daylight to bask, just like the sunskinks. You see, before this, Godzilla was exclusively nocturnal, simply retreating into his bedroom before sunrise, and never coming out until nightfall to hunt and go about his crocodilian business in the rainforest. But with a belly super full of food now, he needed the sun's rays to help with digestion and for the production of vitamin D3 for his developing bones. I think for the past few weeks, Godzilla was acclimating to his new home and to my presence, but was finally comfortable enough now to come out of hiding during the day to get some needed sun. I'd been waiting for this moment forever. I just couldn't wait for the iconic sight of watching Godzilla bask on the pond's bank, just like crocodilians do in the wild. I prepared a powerful lamp and fixated it outside the mesh door. But as I put it in place, it spooked him out, and he retreated back into his bedroom. Aw, guess Godzilla needed more time to get comfortable. But as shy as he was, our croc would soon surprise me. Speaking of surprises, you won't believe what I spotted in the dirt. Hey, what on earth? Little white fragments of shell scattered on the forest floor. Eggshells. OMG. Our animals have been breeding. Life found a way. I had to, but I wasn't quite sure what creatures these eggshells belonged to. Something had hatched in Pantdora, and I had a few suspicions as to what. Speaking of eggs, another surprise was waiting to be discovered, but it was both good news and bad news. I approached the holding container of our Empress. Empress Emeralda, our beloved marbled mantis, had laid an ootheca, an egg sac a few weeks ago, which we knew was fertilized as we facilitated the epic breeding ritual ourselves, and it still hadn't hatched. But look! She had also just laid a second. Whoa! This was amazing! From each one of these oothecae will hatch dozens, if not hundreds, of tiny mantises. And before that happens, the plan was to place this entire stick with the oothecae into our canopy vivarium Orchadia, so our mantises could grow up hunting in our rainforest. Great job, Empress! And just like last time, her abdomen looked quite deflated and skinny. It was time to fatten her up and give her the energy she needed to bounce back. I offered her a roach. She looked at it and was quite reluctant to strike. Here you go, my Empress. Take it. I released the roach, and she finally struck at it. She held onto the roach, not moving. Usually she would be devouring it by now. Let's wiggle it a bit. That usually works at stimulating the feeding response. But just when it looked like she was about to feast, she let the entire roach go. What? It was then that I realized what was going on here, and a deep sense of worry began to creep into my chest. Pantdora was bustling with life. I haven't really been able to update you on what's been happening in our rainforest for the past few weeks, simply because so much was going on outside Pantdora lately. But prepare to be mind-blown by all the action and new discoveries. The golden Carpenter Ants of Pantdora were now undergoing their golden era in the rainforest, as their workers were pretty much omnipresent. I loved watching them scour the vines for the sweet honeydew produced by the mealybugs all over the leaves and stems. Other insects were also trying to mooch off the sweet mealybug deposits, like this fly, which I assume descended from our canopy, ghost ants, and an abundance of these little flying insects whose identity I'm unaware of. Anyone know what they are? I also suspect they had descended from Orchadia. Check out this carpenter ant taking a nap. Ever wonder if ants sleep? Well, they sure do. and a busy worker takes hundreds of these short minute or two naps throughout a 24-hour cycle. But super busy they were, and there wasn't a plant nor stem that these Carpenter Ants didn't cover. And I was happy to know the colony was doing well, nesting somewhere within the Hallelujah tree stump. Speaking of which, another ant species was also nesting in the stump. Our colony of Dwarf Ants, which had been introduced into the rainforest from the beginning, an OG ant colony that has survived the test of time, was busy at one of their nest entrances. But what blew my mind was the world of their nest opening. Let's shrink down and venture closer. I was shocked to discover a whole bustling community of microscopic life surrounding the entrance to their darkened lair. What on earth are those flecks of waving things we see everywhere? Are those tiny worms? I spotted springtails, isopods, mites, and more, making up such a complex and biologically dense community of life in such a tiny pocket of our rainforest. Our dwarf ants were clearly thriving, because I did notice that they'd already been sending out queens and having nuptial flights in Pantdora, which means we can expect more of these dwarf ants to sprout all around our rainforest in the months to come. Also, highly successful, our gnome ants were also pretty omnipresent. I'm amazed at how well the colony is done and how they've integrated wonderfully into our rainforest. Here's a random spider I spotted crawling around, which fell from a web as it was trying to wrap this male dwarf ant elate. I also spotted this cool huntsman skin hanging from a line of silk. A leucophilus beetle was crawling along the forest floor. And guys, in terms of beetles, I have to show you the exciting creature I spotted in the soils. So this here is a dead coconut rhino beetle. It was surrounded by a ton of soil creatures, all breaking it down, as they naturally do. Now sadly, I believe the coconut rhino beetles I had placed in had all passed away now. But strangely enough, as I was scoping out the soils below ground, I was shocked to see this. A shiny and hairy glistening white skin against the glass caught my eye. Wow, it was a Beetle Grub, and it was massive. Not sure how it got here, but my guess was it was a rhino beetle larva that was either laid here as an egg or was one of the random tiny grubs I placed in at the initial Gaia event when I first populated the lands 7 months ago. It had to have been living in these soils for a while, as it was massive. I wonder what species of giant beetle it would become. I guess only time would tell, but super cool to discover it. And perhaps my least favorite creatures in our forest, the most hideous creature, was squirming in the moss. It was an earthworm moving to a new area to burrow. Ew! I'm so grossed out by worms, for some odd reason. Phobias don't make sense. But I had to fight my fear and force myself through exposure therapy to watch the worm squirm by. And ew, look! There's a predatorial land planarian right next to it. Gross. Earthworms were now quite abundant in the rainforest, and I knew, as gross as they looked, they were extremely essential to our ecosystem. They helped break down organic material, produce essential fertilizer for the plants, keep the soil cycling and nicely aerated, and also offer a great food source to several other animals. But why do they have to look like moving digestive organs? Ugh. Alright, but now that we're all caught up with Pandoran life, it was now time to head on up into our trees. Now that the gates to our arboreal theme park were open to the Pandoran public, what was super cool was the sight of the mists from Pantdora floating upwards into the canopy. Have a look. I guess with the heat lamps all around Pantdora, it made the air warmer than above, which caused an interesting convection of air upward into the trees. The sight was so calming and quite gratifying to watch. I could see this upward lifting of air from the glass bridge in the fog blowing through Orchadia. Who would have thought watching air would be so fun? But it was amazing to see that a unique weather system and air movement was already developing between our two worlds. But this was not all, as the coolest weather phenomenon would be happening later. But now it's time to have a look around Orchadia. I already knew there was an orb weaver spider in here, which had now relocated way up here at a better spot, away from the rain spouts. Clever girl. And a tree frog, which loved sleeping in this bush. Both these creatures unintentionally introduced by way of the plants and decor. But it turns out there was more life here to discover. The newly emigrated crickets were already making themselves at home in the trees, inspecting the foliage, and even laying eggs. Awesome! Happy to know that the crickets had wasted no time at getting started on the next generation of prey insects, which was one of the purposes of Orchadia, to offer a refuge for prey insects to proliferate away from ground predators. Herbivores were already getting straight to work too, like this cute snail, which I watched for several minutes glide on its trail of slime over the branches and leaves in search of foliage to munch on. It eventually found a decaying leaf to consume. I smiled watching the initial stages of an orchid opening from its bud. Orchids are just stunning flowers. Have a look at the inside. It looks kind of like a bird, or a disgruntled chef in a red uniform throwing his hands up. More little buds were on the way. I was happy to see the orchids adapting well to our world of trees, and planned on adding more orchids around Orchadia if they continue to thrive. The banyan trees were doing surprisingly well. I had thought they would be dropping their leaves by now, during this acclimation period, but instead the banyan was releasing new shoots and buds. It was so beautiful to see. The vines strung all around had wasted no time in sending out roots to begin anchoring themselves among the trees. In fact, I noticed the vines were already sprouting new leaf shoots, which was amazing. Pretty soon the vines will make our canopy look even more lush. And check this out. In an unexpected turn of events, this tree trunk, which I thought was dead, was actually sprouting leaves too. Whoa! Does this mean actual trees might come to life in our canopy? What a pleasant surprise. Everywhere I turned, the plant life was thriving and making full use of every available space in our canopy treescape. The mists had caused the mosses to truly explode on the branches. Usually growing mosses on wood is such a difficult thing to manage, but here in Orchadia, the deepest of green mosses were gloriously blooming on the wood. Conditions were perfect here for moss, as well as for these awesome organisms. Lichen. So, if you're new to the amazing life forms known as lichen, listen to this. So lichen, which is this cool bluish-gray covering on the wood, is not quite a plant, nor is it a fungus. They're actually a symbiotic superorganism comprised of algae or cyanobacteria, multiple species of fungi, and a yeast embedded in the skin. The combination of all these organisms create the body that is known as lichen. I've never once been able to grow lichen in a terrarium, but here in Orchadia, the cloud rainforest canopy conditions were perfect for it, and I saw the lichen just living their best lives in various places of the wood. Check out that branchy lichen up there. I suspected they were loving all the humidity and decided to bloom, which was all just amazing to see, as many creatures eat lichen. But as I was admiring all the blues and greens of the canopy, a sudden flash of color caught my eye. Whoa, I see red. What was that? It flew high up into the air and landed, bobbing its abdomen up and down before taking off again. Super cool. It was a Damsel Fly, and I watched it chase the various flying insects in our canopy. It landed, and I was then able to have a good look at it. Such a beautiful creature. Before we had a greenish-yellow Damsel Fly in Pantdora, which I assumed was eventually eaten by the sunskinks, but this red one was just as pretty. Now, I was certain this wasn't a creature introduced into Orchadia from its plants, but rather introduced via the water plants in the pond in Pantdora, where the larva matured, then hatched, and found its way up here in the canopy. Great choice for it, as it was much safer up here, for now anyway. When it wasn't resting, it was super active, flying all around the top of Orchadia. Speaking of flying creatures, I then spotted yet another insect, one that is notoriously hated by humans the world over. See it? It was a mosquito, a beautiful black and white one. Now this mosquito was surely introduced by way of the plants, specifically the bromeliad on which it was perched. I knew it had just emerged from its pupal stage within the water trapped inside the bromeliad. Owners of bromeliads know to always routinely wash out these pits of water because they're perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes who lay their eggs into the water pits where the larvae hatch and grow and eventually emerge as adult mosquitoes. Guess our rainforest now has mosquitoes, but I don't know where they're going to be getting their blood supply. I wonder if they can feed on lizard, frog, or croc blood. But perhaps the most surprising newly introduced creatures of all were these. I couldn't believe my eyes when I spotted them. I began to notice several wasps in Orchadia. They surely had emerged from somewhere. I had so many questions. Did they come from the soils of the pots? Perhaps from holes in the branches? Was there some starting wasp nest somewhere in Orchadia? Or are these solitary? Any wasp experts out there care to take a stab at their species ID? If they were from some starting colony somewhere, I was definitely not ready to house a wasp colony in our rainforest. What did they even eat? I began to spot drowned wasps in Aqua Noctis down in Pantdora. They had made their way to floor level and were beginning to drown. Obviously, I saved them. But to be honest, wasps were the last creatures I ever expected in our rainforest. But guys, just when I thought I had seen it all, there was still one other critter that had not yet been spotted that would finally show itself to me by nightfall. Now, Orchadian lights are on an hour longer each day than Pantdora, just to mimic the natural distribution of light in the canopy versus the rainforest floor. And what's cool is, I set it up so the lights dim gradually over a half-hour period, much like they would at sunset. Have a look at this time lapse. And moonlight. The sight of Orchadia at night was absolutely magical, and the views took my breath away. Have a look. The mists covered the treetops with a humidity that blessed the foliage and orchids, as well as all the creatures who are now part of our canopy. It was then that I happened to notice the most interesting phenomenon taking place. When during the day, the air was blowing up into the canopy, now at night, the mists were descending downwards into a cooler nocturnal Pantdora. I loved that the air was mixing between both our biological realms in this way. It was almost as if the exchange of air back and forth over a 24-hour cycle was like our rainforest breathing up during the day and down during the night, like exhaling and inhaling as air moved from one vivarium to the other, then back. It was awesome to know that our rainforest was one massive, breathing superorganism with a life of its own. I imagined all the amazing wonders this new world would reveal to us over time, and I felt so grateful to be the caregiver to this marvelous 2-story rainforest kingdom we created together. It was then that I made a very happy discovery in the branches. Look! Aha! It was a baby house gecko, and the very first time I've ever spotted a baby gecko in our forest. So you're the newborn that hatched from the egg I found in Pantdora. This cutie here was a Pandoran native and had cleverly made its way up to our canopy. How cute. Now geckos lay a double clutch of eggs at a time, so this little baby gecko had a twin somewhere in the canopy running around. I was delighted to get a glimpse of it, and in an instant, I blinked and the baby was gone. Good luck, little one. I visited the Empress and saw her hanging from her branch. But upon closer inspection, I realized that her two hind legs were folded in. And that's when I knew what had happened. I looked at the lifeless gaze of our Empress and said a little prayer. Overnight, she had completed her life's journey and laid her head back against the glass to surrender herself back to the source energy that created her. Our Empress Emeralda had died. Birthing 2 egg sacs is extremely physically demanding for mantises, and we as her caregiver had given her all we could to complete her life's mission. She had successfully done that now, and it was time to take her to her final resting place. I placed her into the banyan tree roots, where she could decay and offer food for soil creatures, which would ultimately provide fertilizer to nourish the banyan tree. The tree would eventually offer food for herbivorous insects, which would eventually become food for her future children. After they emerged from the egg sacs, she was now forever part of the forest, and her life force would soon permeate her offspring. I noticed the orchid had finally completed its bloom, a beautiful bouquet commemorating our Empress over her burial site. It made me smile. You know, one thing I continue to learn from being a caregiver to a rainforest in my home is that every life form had its own timing for everything, its own rhythm. It was our Empress's time to expire, and it was actually a beautiful process. All I could do was sit back and allow life to take its natural course. Over the next few days, all the tree frogs had made their way up to the canopy, and from the looks of things, they were pretty much here to stay. Kermit, our handsome male frog, hung from the vines and was noisy at night, calling for his female, Miss Piggy, to breed. And guess who else was ready to make a move? My jaw dropped when I spotted Godzilla one morning, finally basking on his rock bank, exactly like I had dreamed. He laid there happily soaking in the heat and UV rays from the sun lamp and had officially learned how to properly bask. So awesome, big boy. I'm so happy for you. Enjoy the rays. Indeed, all things on Earth had its own unique schedule. A timing to go places, a timing to thrive, a timing to bloom, a timing to grow, a timing to emerge, a timing to rise up and to descend, a timing to sleep, a timing to catch food, a timing to learn new things, a timing to be born, and a timing to die. It was the one thing most apparent to me now as I stood before our giant 2-story cloud rainforest vivarium. There was a rhythm to life and a heartbeat in our rainforest, which tied all living things on our planet together. And speaking of timing, it was time now for a grand population event. Canopies are the most biodiverse and life-dense areas of the rainforest. And so, it was time to make that a reality now. For our largely underpopulated canopy, I had a few creatures on the side that I'd been waiting to add into our new canopy vivarium. Come, my children. Time to enjoy your new world of trees. Vote in my community tab to affect this story.